President-elect Trump is taking sides against police and for violent convicts, showing some of his most extreme rhetoric during this campaign will indeed guide how he governs. This is our top story. I'm going to walk you through it. Donald Trump says he will likely pardon the people convicted of horrific violence against the United States, against the police, against the Capitol on January 6th. And when pressed in this first sit-down interview since the election on the details about that, President-elect Trump stood by pardoning the convicts, specifically who attacked the police savagely that day with weapons and with vengeance. Several officers, as you may recall, went on to die after that brutal day. Trump's plans sound like they could include also pardoning the leaders of the insurrection who were convicted of those gravest felonies, including sedition. Trump's statements flatly side against police and law enforcement. These pardons would bolster a precedent against law and order in our country, unlike anything we've seen in a long time. I'll get to historical comparisons in a few moments to give context, to give a factual baseline for just how unusual this is in law and history. What this would also do is create a kind of ongoing validation and quite literal legal support for anyone who wanted to do this in the future, to follow an election loser's bidding, even if it leads to violence and federal crimes and felonies and even insurrection. So for context right now, we're actually going to air President-elect Trump's answer at some length.
You promised to pardon those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Are you still vowing to follow through with that promise?
We're looking at it right now, most likely, yeah. But most likely I'll do it very quickly.
Very quickly. Okay, but some of them, 169 of them, have pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers.
Because they had no choice. 900
pleaded guilty to other crimes. They're also going to be eligible for a pardon from you?
Listen, it's a very tough system. Do you know almost nobody? I saw people that didn't even go into the building and they were convicted.
But you're going to consider pardoning even those who've pleaded guilty to crimes, including assaulting police officers?
Well, sometimes they say, here's your choice. Yeah, I'm going to look at everything. We're going to look at individual cases, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm going to be acting very quickly.
Within your first 100 days, first day?
First day.
First day?
Yeah, I'm looking first day.
First day, that is the level of priority the president-elect sees this as. We're talking about a president embracing criminals who attempted to overthrow the United States government, who famously attacked lawmakers and went after people and talked about wanting to go after police, go after Pence, go after lawmakers who fled, quite literally, as they chanted about going after them. Many were charged with violently attacking Capitol Police and conspiring against the U.S. government, some convicted, as mentioned, of sedition, the most serious felony. And the president made a range of false claims in the interview about January 6th. He mentioned various conspiracy theories. We're not airing all of those tonight, but we will air some brief facts of what those convicts did. The country, much of it, lived through this in real time, as it was an insurrection that played out on the news in live videos and videos sometimes made by the people later convicted of these crimes. They advocated the assassination of members of the U.S. government.
We need 21 priority. We just had protests. East Circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Go home. We love you. You're very special.
That hand-to-hand combat you see there, which we're playing just as a factual record, went on for hours. When Donald Trump finally saw that the people were being dispersed, he then, of course, only then came out and still called them special, as I show you there to remember. And while Trump said that, this was not actually a partisan divide in the ensuing hours between, say, the Republican and Democratic Party as the insurrection occurred. The divide was between the supporters of Trump's coup and basically everyone else. Recall some of the Republican members of Congress who quite literally fled for their lives from those Trump supporters, later convicts. They returned to the Senate floor, which had become a crime scene because of what those people did. And those lawmakers, Democratic and Republican, spoke with pretty much one voice that next day over into the early morning hours. They didn't have time to consult polls or sample their state parties. The Republicans may not have known that Donald Trump would make the political comeback he did. Republicans appeared to, having witnessed what happened, they appeared to think and state that the violence of those Trump supporters, now convicts, was wrong and beyond the pale.
We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats. This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is.
Violence is not how you achieve change.
Chaos, anarchy. The violence today was wrong and un-American.
There's nothing Vladimir Putin could have come up with better than what happened here. Makes us look like we're in total chaos.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough until it wasn't. You saw Senator Rubio there now joining the current Trump administration, which, according to Trump in the new interview, will pardon these very people that were just called there by Republicans in very recent history as thugs, as wrong, as un-American. Violence, no way to deal with it. That's the Republican Party addressing those people that Donald Trump now is making news vowing to pardon on day one or right away. Over 1,000 Americans have actually been convicted for crimes relating to January 6th, and that includes people who quite viciously, repeatedly, deliberately attacked police officers, including one man sentenced to 20 years who used bear spray inside the mask of an officer, testifying later that he thought he might die, used a crutch to smash an officer's head, giving him a concussion. As I mentioned, some officers did go on to die in the days after that. One of the Proud Boy members who stormed the Capitol told a judge sentencing to 6 years, "You could give me 100 years, I'd do it all over again." Or take another one of the ringleaders who, according to Trump, could still be pardoned. He said he would plan to pardon all of them, just about. Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes, who founded that organization, prosecutors said he organized the insurrection. He got 18 years for one of the most serious felonies, seditious conspiracy. That is a rare crime, remember. A judge telling him he presented an ongoing threat and peril to this country and the very fabric of our democracy. That's part of why these people were prosecuted, found guilty through a fair system, judged by their peers, and then sentenced by federal judges. So you have this group of people now hearing Donald Trump and talk about the opposite of law and order or Blue Lives Matter or deterrence. Heck of a lot of other people will see this act if he carries it out, as he says, on day one, January 20th. And there are convicts who always thought Trump would give them this kind of lenience if he got back into office. One telling the judge at his own sentencing, Trump's gonna pardon me anyways. Talk about lawlessness. Now, those are just a few egregious examples that I'm mentioning in our coverage, so you deal with the facts and not just what gets memory hold or minimized or what people just lie about for their own other reasons. Raw power, hatred for police, hatred for democracy, just a desire to have power at all costs. Whatever the many different reasons are, the facts run against all of those power-hungry claims. There are hundreds of others. The prospect of pardoning up to 1,000 people for these type of crimes committed against the United States and sometimes without any apology afterward would be unprecedented. So you have to look to history to find anything in the ballpark around this is not apples to apples, but again, you have to go back a long time. If you go all the way to the Civil War, the rebellion, there were then mass pardons all that ways long back. Then President Andrew Johnson gave an amnesty pardon. This was in 1865. So you're going back over a century and a half to those rebels. He went on to issue 13,000 pardons of Confederate soldiers who had been labeled traitors over the next couple of years. This was part of the great lengths that were taken to try to come up with some way to get through what was a very literal multi-year civil war. The last one, if you check, was December 25th, 1868, a full pardon and amnesty to all persons engaged in the late rebellion. Now, that was extremely controversial at the time. The context was whether or not the country would hold in some effort at what they called compromise. One journalistic account going back through all this by Politico noted that that pardon policy was a large component of the policy decisions that did lead to Johnson's impeachment and made him one of the most loathed presidents in American history. And while we don't have the time or space to resolve all of the post-Civil War efforts tonight in history, I can tell you it was that use, and at the time what many people thought was an abuse of the pardon power, that was so troubling about his presidency, Johnson coming closer to removal by impeachment than any president ever, including Donald Trump through his 2 impeachments. Now, no one, not that article, not contemporary observers or legal historians, no one is saying the January 6th insurrection is on par with the Civil War, which was, of course, a very different and multi-year actual armed conflict. But the legal precedents are that few and far between because attacks on the United States and its government are actually fairly rare, especially when done in conjunction with U.S. leaders, whether they're from the losing South or the winning North, or in Donald Trump's case, the loser of the 2020 election, leading something that was fairly adjudicated and convicted as a sedition, the legal word in part for insurrection. It is extremely rare to see this kind of use, and many would say abuse of the pardon power, and used flying in the face of not only those Republicans I just showed you, and Democrats and members of Congress, and a sitting vice president who was targeted for assassination, a sitting Speaker of the House targeted for assassination, and the very many people in blue, the Blue Lives Matter, the police. You saw in that interview there, Kristen Welker pressing President-elect Trump on that very point. Even if one wants to debate the rest of it, would he really be pardoning the people who so savagely attacked police, who are part of, in the D.C. case, the federal police force that keeps Congress and sometimes federal areas and the executive branch safe? And you heard his answer there. He said, yes. He's pushing this out now, perhaps to try to normalize it by January 20th. And yet, as you saw in the footage I just showed you from Republicans on the night of January 6th, there is nothing normal or acceptable about it, according to them and most everyone who has ever held any high office in the United States. And yet that is exactly where we are.
So I'm going to start tonight with something that really jumped out at me from Donald Trump's interview with NBC's Kristen Welker, especially because of the way it has been interpreted by some. And that is the way Trump talked about retribution.
You campaigned on destroying the deep state. Do you want Kash Patel to launch investigations into people on that list?
No, I mean, he's going to do what he thinks is right.
Are you going to direct him to do it?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Are you going to go after Joe Biden?
I'm really looking to make our country successful. I'm not looking to go back into the past. I'm looking to make our country successful. Retribution will be through success.
Pam Bondi talks about investigating the investigators. Do you want her to investigate Jack Smith?
I want her to do what she wants to do.
Do you want to see Jack Smith investigated?
Well, I think he's very corrupt, but I want her to do whatever she has to do.
Are you going to direct her to prosecute Jack Smith?
She's a very smart person. She was a great attorney general in Florida. She's very experienced. I want her to do what she wants to do. I'm not going to instruct her to do it, no.
I want her to do whatever she wants to do. Now, some people are listening to that and even suggesting, and I mean out loud on television, that Trump has changed. He didn't say he was going to direct anyone to go after anyone. His tone is different. He is a new man. Retribution through success? No, that doesn't sound so bad. But before you jump to what I would consider an inaccurate conclusion, I'd invite you to keep watching the interview, because in that same interview, he also said this.
Cheney was behind it, and so was Benny Thompson and everybody on that committee. For what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
Okay. So he wants Liz Cheney and members of the January 6th committee in jail, but he's not going to direct them to do anything. Now, the idea that Trump would need to direct loyalists like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi to do something like that is pretty laughable. There was never in any administration, and especially not his, going to be some formal sit down or some paper trail where he tells them in a memo in large, bold print from the White House, go investigate my enemies. Here's an attached list. Signed Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean he's not giving them directions. Because he is, including in that interview, pretty directly. The boss says Liz Cheney and members of the January 6th committee should be in jail. Is it really all that different because he didn't scream that direction? Because he attempted to give himself some public plausible deniability, I suppose? Of course not. How do you think Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are going to hear what he said in that interview? I think you know the answer to that question. They already know what he wants, and they've known that for a long time.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden. She should be impeached and prosecuted for her actions.
Wouldn't it be terrible to throw the president's wife and the former Secretary of State? Think of it, the former Secretary of State, but the president's wife into jail. It's very possible that it's going to happen to them.
She should be prosecuted. Nancy Pelosi should be prosecuted. The judge and the AG should be arrested and punished accordingly. They should be prosecuted for what they did. If the reporter doesn't want to tell you, it's bye-bye. The reporter goes to jail. These people should be put in jail the way they talk about our judges and our justices. Prosecutors should be prosecuted.
Kash Patel and Pam Bondi already know what the assignment is. They have their marching orders. You just heard them many times over. And there's a reason he picked both of them for these jobs. Donald Trump made sure to hand select people for these positions who are ready and willing to carry the assignment out. And that's how this is going to work. A bit of a wink, a little nudge, comment here and a comment there, laying some very obvious breadcrumbs for everyone to see, like saying it many times very publicly. He did that also in the Meet the Press interview. And he's been doing it for years. And look, I sincerely hope Trump decides not to go after his political enemies. I hope the loyalists that he wants to install in these top law enforcement jobs decide not to go after them either. We should all hope that. I mean, that would be way better for the country. But it's also important to be realistic in moments like this and to not put our heads in the sand here, because Donald Trump has told us what he plans to do many, many times. And trust me, listen carefully, listen closely, I guess. He just told us once again in that interview what he wants to do. The tone might have been different, but the message was very, very clear. Joining me now is someone who knows a thing or two about retribution from Donald Trump. Unfortunately, Preet Bharara is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who was fired by Trump back in 2017. Okay, Preet, so I just gave my take on whether Trump has changed his plans for political retribution. Again, I certainly hope he has. But when you listen to that interview and the clips I played and any other parts of it you listened to yesterday, knowing what you know, what do you think?
So I think that you have it pretty much correct. Look, you don't know, because the future is the future, and people change their minds, and something may happen on a different timeline. But if you take as lawyers like to say, in the totality of the circumstances, you have a person who has talked about retribution day after day, week after week, month after month. He has appointed people, as you also pointed out, who themselves have taken a page from Donald Trump's rhetorical book and said they want to jail and prosecute people, including, by the way, his first Attorney General nominee who fell by the wayside, Matt Gaetz, and then the substitute Attorney General nominee, Pam Bondi, has said similar things, and then joined that with the FBI director nominee, who has not only said things about prosecuting and holding people who had those jobs previously accountable, but also has an appendix to his book that reads like an enemies list. So, I agree with your hope and join you in the hope that Donald Trump is not going to just decide willy-nilly to go after political rivals who are just doing their jobs, whether they were judges, whether they were prosecutors, whether they were members of Congress, all of whom, by the way, enjoy some form of the immunity that Donald Trump has been seeking for years because they're just doing their jobs. I hope that that's true, but, fool me once, as they say. We'll see what happens, but all the evidence points to the fact that Donald Trump doesn't have to instruct his people. He essentially and effectively instructed them by being on that television program on your network and saying this is what he wants with respect to the January 6th committee. So I don't hold out a lot of hope, but a little bit.
This was, the reason these remarks, he said it many times before, this was his first interview as president-elect, and I think it's very important not to get numb to what he's saying, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So I wanted to ask you, though, about kind of if he wanted to move forward with this, or if his team, as you noted, who very much know what their directions are, wanted to move forward with it, if the Justice Department wanted to put someone like Liz Cheney in jail, or at least make their lives difficult, how would they do it? What would their approach be?
Yeah, so, it's hard to know because, as I said, most of the people that Donald Trump and others have been talking about are people who are engaging in conduct in connection with their official duties, right? Prosecutors bring cases, members of Congress conduct hearings, they pass legislation, judges decide cases. All within the ambit and normal duties and obligations and within the perimeter of their jobs, which usually is off limits for even a civil suit, much less a criminal prosecution. What I worry about is not so much at the end of the day that someone will be convicted and sent to prison on trumped-up charges or false pretenses, but that the very act of making the inquiry, right, which is a very easy thing to do, at the end of the day, to send someone to prison and get them convicted, you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. To open up an investigation and begin, a process that puts people under the gun, that costs them a lot of money, sometimes it can cost them their life savings, is a much, much lower standard. And you can imagine that if they were going to do this, and again, I join you in your hope that they're not, as political retribution, they will find some reason to say, well, maybe they destroyed evidence. They're saying that about the 1-6 committee, which I don't know any evidence of that. Or that there was a misstatement made in connection with some hearing, or there was something malicious in the way people went about it. And at the end of the day, after a year or 2 years or 3 years, it gets thrown out or it gets defeated in court. In the meantime, people have had their reputations ruined and people have had their bank accounts emptied. That's my worry here. And I've talked to, by the way, actual people, and I know folks who are representing actual people who have been in government and who are on this list in the crosshairs of people like Donald Trump and the folks that he's planning to bring into government. And they're not people who run around with their hair on fire. They're reasonable people, and they're worried about this.
For good reason. And as much as I think we're both hopeful, I think the important thing is I don't think either of us are naive, and no one should be, about what's possible here. Let me ask you about something that happened today. Incoming Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley called for FBI Director Christopher Wray to step aside. He has 3 more years in his term. There's a reason they're 10-year terms, so that they can cross over different parties and administrations. And he wrote in there, for the good of the country, it's time for you and your deputy to move on to the next chapter in your lives. I therefore must express my vote of no confidence in your continued leadership of the FBI. He was a Trump appointee, Christopher Wray. What do you have experienced, not exactly this, but a version of this. What do you think in this moment Christopher Wray should do? Should he resign, or should he make Trump fire him, I suppose?
Well, I'm partial to having the historical record be clear. And if you have a term of a certain number of years, my situation was somewhat different, but if you're Chris Wray and you were appointed by the guy who's coming back into office, and you shook his hand and he said, I want you to be my FBI director for 10 years, and you believe, and I think the record reflects, that you haven't done anything untoward, you haven't done anything improper, you haven't laid down on the job, why should you leave? Allow the historical record to show that the person who wanted you to stay for some other reason, although it's his constitutional right, I believe, to fire Chris Wray, even though there's a 10-year term. I'm not disputing that. But if the point is that you want to remove an FBI director to put in another FBI director who's less qualified, who has less of the proper disposition to be an FBI director, and who is going to go after your political enemies, then I think the record is better for history to have demanded to be fired rather than resign voluntarily in advance.
Well, 50 years of the Assad family dictatorship came to an end yesterday in Syria. President Biden made this statement at 1:39 p.m.
At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country.
President Biden made the point that Assad's support from Russia collapsed under the pressure of the war Vladimir Putin decided to start in Ukraine.
Russia's support for Assad also failed. And that's because Ukraine, backed by our American allies, has put up a wall of resistance against the invading Russian forces, inflicting massive damage on the Russian forces. And that has left Russia unable to protect its main ally in the Middle East.
President Biden describes his administration's policy on Syria, which has now ended with the collapse of the Assad regime yesterday.
We maintained our military presence in Syria, our counter-ISIS, to counter the support of local partners as well on the ground, their partners, never ceding an inch of territory, taking out leaders of ISIS, ensuring that ISIS can never establish a safe haven there again.
And it will now be up to Donald Trump to ensure that ISIS can never establish a safe haven there again. But Donald Trump has not suggested that he has any idea how to do that. He did post on social media, Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. Vladimir Putin is reportedly protecting Bashar al-Assad, who is now residing in Moscow, having successfully fled to Moscow yesterday. In Syria, no one is sure what will happen next. Here's Richard Engel in Damascus.
And that has been the kind of scene that we've been seeing all morning here, where people have come to Damascus from all over the country to sing songs, to take photographs of this moment. There was a drone in the air a moment ago trying to get some high shots, and lots of celebratory gunfire. These are civilians. People are coming out. You can hear some women here ululating, which is a very typical way of cheering and celebrating. And there are also fighters here. Some of the rebels have made appearances, and they are being greeted like heroes as people come out, embrace them, thank them for the fight. This has just been a stunning last couple of weeks in this country.
Donald Trump's choice for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has spoken favorably about Assad in the past, saying, quote, Assad is not the enemy of the United States, end quote. She has admitted to secretly traveling to meet with Assad at a time when all travel in and out of Syria was controlled by Assad. If her nomination makes it all the way to a confirmation hearing, Tulsi Gabbard will be asked about every word she said to Assad and what he said to her. And while she's testifying, the former dictator of Syria will be sitting in Moscow watching her confirmation hearing and knowing if she tells any lies under oath about her communications with him. Assad will, of course, tell his landlord now, Vladimir Putin, that Tulsi Gabbard has compromised herself, and then Vladimir Putin will own her future. We have the possibility of Donald Trump empowering a director of national intelligence who can be blackmailed by deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin. No president other than Donald Trump would ever nominate as unqualified and reckless a person as Tulsi Gabbard for any position in government. So, too, with Donald Trump's nomination of Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, we can only wonder what Pete Hegseth was doing over the weekend when the regime in Syria was collapsing. He has promised to stop drinking only if he is confirmed as Secretary of Defense. That means, according to his former co-workers at Fox, when he was hosting a weekend morning show, it is possible that Pete Hegseth was drunk all weekend this weekend, as he reportedly has been in the past while working at Fox. It is extremely likely that President Biden had private conversations, possibly several this weekend, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin as the situation was rapidly unfolding in Syria. That's the kind of job Defense Secretary is. The urgent situations and the urgent calls can happen at any moment of the day or night, including the weekends. If Pete Hegseth doesn't have a drinking problem, there is still no reason to think that he could handle any aspect of the job of Defense Secretary at any level of sobriety. Donald Trump apparently believes he can somehow avoid the embarrassment of the possible collapse of Pete Hegseth's nomination by simply making no effort to get him confirmed.
Have you gotten assurances from senators that he's going to be confirmed?
No. That interview also included these gems from Donald Trump. Quote, I consider myself to be the father of IVF. And I'm sort of proud of my decision. At the same time, sometimes I regret it. And I know more about judges than any human being in history. That interview also included Donald Trump repeatedly telling the lie that the January 6th committee deleted all of the evidence that they collected in their investigation, and that members of the committee should go to jail. Donald Trump then added that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Liz Cheney or any other members of the January 6th committee. He also said that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Joe Biden, even though Donald Trump made an explicit in-writing campaign promise to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Joe Biden. Donald Trump was asked about his nominee for Secretary of Defense being the first presidential nominee in history to promise not to drink if he gets the job.
He'll stop drinking if he gets this job.
Yeah.
Does that worry you?
No, I think that everybody has something that they can stop. Some people can stop eating. I'm lucky I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating.
If you stop eating, as hunger strikers around the world have proven, you will be dead in a matter of months. If you stop drinking alcohol, you might just live a lot longer. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know the difference between stopping eating and stopping drinking alcohol. And an answer like that would get any previous president condemned as being too old or just too out of it and confused to handle the job of president. But Donald Trump's rank and unyielding stupidity on every subject raised in that interview is something the Washington news media does not seem particularly animated by. In the same way, they have been animated, to put it mildly, every time Joe Biden stutters or stumbles in the middle of a sentence or uses the wrong word, when what Joe Biden is actually saying is both true and important. If Joe Biden said any of the things Donald Trump said in that interview yesterday, the national news media would have declared him utterly lost. As of tonight, Pete Hegseth does not have the votes to win confirmation in the Senate Armed Services Committee. 3 Republican members of that committee have made it clear they are not now voting yes on the Hegseth nomination, and it takes only 1 Republican vote to kill that nomination in the committee. That includes the 2 Republican women on the committee, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa and Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska, and it also includes Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota.
What do you make of Pete Hegseth as President-elect Trump's pick for defense secretary? Have you decided where you are on that?
I had a great meeting with Pete. I told him that I really thought there was a path forward for him to be confirmed. But I think the challenge for Pete is going to be responding in public to some of the allegations that have been made.
Does he have your support?
We'll find out after he comes back and he answers those questions in public.
We'll find out. It only takes 1 Republican senator in the Armed Services Committee to vote against Pete Hegseth to defeat the nomination in the committee. It is still technically possible to bring that nomination to the Senate floor for a vote of the full Senate, but usually a nomination defeated in the committee dies in the committee. Here's what Senator Deb Fischer said about Pete Hegseth's nomination.
Are you ready to say where you're going to fall on that vote quite yet?
You know, we'll see how the hearing goes. But as I said, we had a great conversation.
We'll see how the hearing goes. Everyone knows how the hearing is going to go. Everyone knows the hearing is going to be a disaster. Every Republican senator knows if Pete Hegseth makes it to a Senate confirmation hearing, there will be endless testimony and questioning about his public drunkenness and his drunkenness at work and the extramarital night of sex that he admitted to in a police investigation that happened in a Monterey, California hotel room, which the woman involved told the Monterey police was rape. No accused rapist has ever had a Senate confirmation hearing. Pete Hegseth is now scheduled to have the first Senate confirmation hearing in history of an accused rapist. And every Republican senator who's saying we'll see how the hearing goes knows exactly how the hearing is going to go. And they know that voting against his nomination will be much, much easier after that hearing. Senator Joni Ernst, who is running for re-election in 2 years, is now being targeted for a possible Republican primary challenge in Iowa if she doesn't support Pete Hegseth. She has now taken to telling reporters, these are her words, quote, "I am supporting him through this process," end quote. She has said that repeatedly now to reporters. And of course, reporters realize that doesn't really tell you how she's going to vote.
Absolutely. It means that we're having really good discussions, and we discussed several items that were really important to me, and I'll just refer back to my statement on those items. But what I appreciated very much about Mr. Hegseth, who came in, he really does respect the process, and I'm grateful for that. But again, I'll refer you back to my statement.
Are you confident with denials about those assault allegations? Do you believe those denials?
I'll refer you back to the statement.
Will you have another meeting with him?
That's to be determined, but thank you.
You talked about the audit in your statement. What does that mean? Can you provide more details?
Yes, and we talked through a number of issues that the Pentagon has right now, and it was a very thoughtful and deep conversation about several items that I'd already talked to him about, and it was good to have a real thorough policy discussion.
Did the pressure of getting back home and primary politics play into this?
We have been talking these same issues every meeting that we've had, and he had really thoughtful answers. So thank you. Thanks, guys.
No matter how many times they asked, she repeatedly refused to say that she's going to vote for Pete Hegseth's nomination.
What did you make of what you just heard, specifically and particularly Governor Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, having some things to say about the lionization of this shooter, which we have seen both online and off?
Yeah, I've seen it myself. I was taken aback by the degree of seeming happiness with the demise of a corporate CEO. I get the fact that we all have horror stories about healthcare insurance and denials of claims or battles that we may have engaged in or family members. But the answer, of course, to societal problems is not murder. And I think one of the things that began to concern me, Joy, as this went on, was the possibility that we could have a kind of hero fugitive where people would not be helping to capture him. So this ended well with a citizen doing the right thing. And it was, you know, as high-tech as we've become in law enforcement, and we're on camera all the time, and high-tech facial recognition, and all of that, it came down to releasing the photos that we had, right, even though they were masked, and then letting the public do their job. It's the crowdsourcing of crime solving. And as sophisticated as we may get, I'm all about believing in releasing what you have and letting citizens get the work done for you in support of what you're doing.
And I think that process, and this is something that I think you probably thought about, that we've talked about behind the scenes just among producers, is whether or not that sort of lionization of him and really people's genuine anger. And I think, as you said, legitimate anger at this industry may have made fewer people willing to do that, willing to come forward. Do you think that, I mean, this man's face was literally everywhere. There was a picture of him unmasked with just a surgical mask on the back of a car. There were images of him all over the place. There's CCTV all over New York. He rode away on a bike. There was a lot of information that was sort of gathered about him. Do you think that maybe the delay in apprehending him had something to do with people's sense that maybe some people didn't want him to get caught?
It's a valid question. This went on, and despite all the publicity, so you've got to ask yourself, for example, and we'll get to this, I suppose, maybe in a few days. You've got a friend, family member, colleague, and his photo's everywhere, and you're not identifying him to the police? He's been missing for 2 weeks. Where is that friend or family member? We heard earlier today at an NYPD press conference that this guy was not on their radar screen. That's astounding to me, that no one called in and said, hey, I think that's my cousin. I think that's my college roommate. So that's a fascinating question that we need to get to the bottom of. And then we need, we all want to know why, right, Joy? So where's the connection to United Healthcare? Is it, as has been reported, that he has some kind of back issue? I noted as I went through all of his books that he's read, which he's posted online, that one of the books, in addition to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber's book, which he commented extensively on, and that's significant, was another book about back pain and dealing with medical practice and treatment for back pain, which the book describes as kind of a game or a farce, that doctors want to string you along with your back pain. So I don't know, but we want to know that. And it will help to go toward ideology.
And let's talk about some of the things that made it look like he was leaving sort of breadcrumbs, really, almost for investigators. There was the backpack full of Monopoly money. There was the World War II firearm that had a suppressor on it. There was, the words that were written on the bullet casings that match a book that was critical of the healthcare insurance industry. You could go on and on. I mean, I was even sort of fascinated by the fact that this man stayed in a youth hostel or in a hostel where there were 6 other people, strangers, who could identify him there, and then took his mask down to allegedly flirt with the person at the front desk. Like, it almost, riding away on a bike, like you name it, it felt like some of the behavior was almost the behavior of somebody who was actually leaving breadcrumbs in order to be caught. Is that something that you, as an FBI, I don't know if you were a profiler when you were in the agency, but the profile seems odd for somebody who was trying to get away.
Yeah, look, this is not the profile of someone who kills a CEO like this. This young man, extremely bright, master's degree from an Ivy League school, wealthy family. He's got a bright future ahead of him, and that's over now. But he does seem to match a profile of someone who's an activist killer. He's killing for a cause. If you read what he's written about the Unabomber, he concludes that under some circumstances it is ethical to murder someone, particularly around corporate greed and money. Is that why he left Monopoly money for the police to see, that it's all about money? With regard to the gun, and I have to bring this up because of gun safety concerns throughout our society, that gun that he had, we now know, was a ghost gun, illegal in many states and federally, because it's made with a 3D printer. You can do this at home. You can go rent a 3D printer. You can access it at your library sometimes and say, yeah, I need 3 hours on a printer every day. That's what happened here. And, make your own gun. And they can't be traced. So this is increasingly a problem that police tell us they find these guns at crime scenes with increasing frequency. It's a problem, and it should be a part of the discussion of this case.
Frank Figliuzzi, always appreciate you being here to give us all of those insights. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And up next, one of the more unexpected responses, as we've just been talking about in this show so far, to that murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, is the outpouring of anger against the healthcare industry and its executives.
The United States will be the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we'll get it done.
That pledge from the now president-elect came earlier this year, and in the new Congress, a Senate Republican, I want you to please pay attention to this. I know you want to tune out, but please don't. They plan to propose a bill that would sell off some of the Federal Reserve's gold to buy Bitcoin. Watch this.
Have we got a present for President Donald Trump? Here it is. This is the Bitcoin Reserve Bill. Over 5 years, the United States will assemble 1 million Bitcoin, 5% of the world's supply. And it will be held for a minimum of 20 years and can be used for one purpose: reduce our debt.
Well, Cynthia Lummis, you can take that bill and sit down with me any night of the week, and I would love to go through every word, every paragraph, every page. But I'd first like to know how much the crypto industry has given you, because for fact's sake, you cannot pay debt down with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin crosses the $100,000 mark, like it did last week, that means it would cost the government at least $100 billion. And former SEC official John Reed was on 60 Minutes last night to sound the alarm about just how dangerous this industry is.
Crypto is a scourge. It's not something that you want in your society. It has no utility. It's just pure speculation. Remember, there's no balance sheet to crypto. There's no financial statements. Every single crime you can conceive of is easier to do now because of crypto, especially ransomware, human sex trafficking, sanctions evasion, money laundering. North Korea is financing their nuclear weapons program using crypto.
Every crime you can think of is exponentially easier because of crypto. Here to discuss, Zeke Fox, investigative reporter for Bloomberg Businessweek and Bloomberg News. He is the author of Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Dan Nathan's still with us. I don't even want to say this would be the biggest bailout to crypto ever, because they don't need a bailout. They're not in trouble. This would be the biggest bonus boon right there before our eyes, transferring billions of dollars to an industry we know almost nothing about, that's packed with money laundering and bad deeds.
I mean, it's wild. People are mad right now about the health insurance industry's profits. That's $100 billion. That's a couple of years of the entire industry's profits that would be spent buying Bitcoins from people who already have them. And it is a kind of a bailout. I mean, Bitcoin's been around for 15 years. It hasn't delivered on any of its promises. It's as old as Uber. It's old as WhatsApp, but nobody's really using it for anything. Now, they've given Trump a lot of money. They've got him talking about coming in and having the government spend huge money to pump the price up even further. It's really wild.
Well, it has delivered on something. It's a trading vessel for people who have made a ton of money and lost, but who've made.
Well, it's delivered on one important thing. It is a store of value, not too different than gold, right? So it's up 30,000% in the last 10 years. There's very few other assets on the planet have done that. Maybe NVIDIA, they're the ones that make the high-end GPUs that power generative AI. So when I think about what's going on here, it's a $2 trillion market cap. It's not going away. And if you think about why it's gone up of late, is because of the promise of deregulation, the leaning in. And I'll just say this, if you think MAGA movement is a strong political movement, just wait until you see these Bitcoiners. This is like one of the strongest financial religious movements that I've ever seen as long as I've been in the business for nearly 30 years. So it's here to stay, and maybe some new regulation will kind of help. And the last thing I'll just say, Zeke, when you think about this, I know you did a lot of work on this. Some of the smartest people that I know in finance and in tech believe in this, and they believe in the technology that's underlying it.
Okay,
it doesn't mean that the government.
Okay, that's my point. Two things can be true. Yeah. There could be real value in it. There could be a real business there. But that doesn't mean that there needs to be a government program transferring $100 billion to it.
And when we talk about smart people being into Bitcoin, is it because they think Bitcoin is like the technology that's going to power the future? Or is it because they're smart enough to realize there are a lot of people who are going to get on the train, feel the FOMO, and buy in? I mean, if you were able to predict that, more power to you. But I don't think the government should be in that business.
Well, I mean, there's no different than people investing in stocks or other illiquid assets. There really isn't. I mean, if people believe.
Hold on a minute. Beneath that stock are companies that sell products that you can. Okay, ready? Let's give you the Hawk Tuah girl example, okay? Yeah. A drunk girl outside a bar who becomes famous for a lewd comment, more power to her, okay? She then launches a coin, is dishonest publicly about action around that coin, the value sinks, and now all these Bitcoin investors want this money. If that isn't like peak subprime, it makes me think I'm watching. It makes me think
it's unregulated. So that's the point. Why has it just gone from 50,000 to 100,000? All these folks believe that there's going to be a regulatory framework put in place that will really be the sort of thing that will let that sort of innovation come out. I mean, I don't own it. I'm not making like the strongest case for it right now, but I understand why people own it and where they think it's going.
So I would buy it, not it. I mean, this argument, assuming, do you believe smart regulation is coming? Because one could argue that Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren weren't even open to it. One could argue that they said, we're not open for business. We think this is criminal. So there's a space between being hyper pro Bitcoin and the Republican Bitcoin bill and where Elizabeth Warren is. Is there a lane for smart regulation that you think could be coming?
It seems, I mean, Trump's pick for the SEC, Paul Atkins, he signaled that he's definitely going to change course from Gary Gensler. And what he said is that actually, I thought this was pretty crazy. The failure of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried's giant fraud, he said that it wouldn't have happened had regulations in the U.S. been looser. That by having tough regulations here, enforcing our existing securities laws, they drove crypto operators offshore where like anything went. And I think that if anything, the SEC let the last bubble get out of hand, saw tons of fraud happening in plain sight, and didn't do anything until prices started going back down.
I'll just say this. There's a finite supply.
I'll just say this.
I'll just say a finite supply of this. You know who's buying it? Putin's buying it. Kim Jong-un's buying it. So when you think about that,
Dan Nathan's buying
why wouldn't we be in the same game? Because if it's going to continue to go higher, the whole existence of it initially was to kind of offset the debasement of the U.S. dollar. Right?
Okay, and so all these boys in their basements, right, taking their graduation money and saying, I'm not going to college, I'm going all crypto all the time. On Friday, I spoke to a bunch of high school personal finance teachers who cannot even get their students to focus on learning what mortgages are because they're like, I'm all in on crypto. That's my future.
Yeah, but what if it is the next thing? So what, you have an asymmetric sort of opportunity here. It can only go to zero, and it could go up, to the moon, right?
So you're saying there's a chance.
What I'm saying is, like, just think about that, right? And if you have enough people behind it, if you have a government behind it, why would you want to take the other side of that?
Okay, fine. Right? Let's say we buy everything Dan is saying. But in order to do that and have a true level of success for the masses, you need smart regulation and some level of guardrails. And right now it feels like we just going to let it rip.
Sure. I mean, we can talk about there's a finite supply, but at this point, the price is really high, right? I think Bitcoin's a little bit like a pyramid. The tech guys got in early. They're at the top. The masses are coming in with the ETF. They're kind of at the bottom. This pyramid is getting really, really big. And no amount of smart regulation is going to make a new level come in. That's why the Bitcoiners donated big money to Donald Trump, got him to start talking about this Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's the kind of thing that could push the price up.
He's not selling any books in Silicon Valley right now. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Even if it's a pyramid scheme, it pays to be on top of the pyramid.
It's true.
There you go.